Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the Pitch and Tonic podcast with your co-hosts. My name is Kyle Morrow.
My name's Sarah Jane Bavron.
And there's a dog on the way.
Classic.
Today we are going to be talking about something a little bit more serious. And that is the weird power dynamic of a music instructor and their students.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I think both of us have been thinking about lately, now that we are the instructors.
Yeah.
Like we have students, and looking back on our past instructors, be that in recent years at college or when we were younger and our older instructors. Yeah.
Why don't we kind of talked about this in our get to know you video, but let's talk about our backgrounds with just music education in general. Who would you like to go first?
You can go first.
Okay.
You can go first.
I would say I'm an anomaly, but I went to music school and got into music college without having any prior private instruction. So before college, I never had a private music teacher or a piano teacher. All of my vocal talent, I guess you would say, would be self-taught with kind of natural talent backing me for a little bit of it. And my music education was also very Catholic focused because I went to a Catholic school K through 12 every Friday up until my freshman year of high school. I would sing in the choir lofts for church before school started. I went through that weird period where the Catholic Church was like, we need to be more inviting, so we're going to change all of the staples, I guess, of the Catholic Mass to the same key everywhere, which was very weird. I was not a fan of that for several reasons. One being you kind of lose creative freedom for the church the second you decide to make everything the same key. It's kind of annoying, but whatever. Anyway, and then when I was in middle school, I had swing choir. I took all of the music classes I physically could. And then high school, at one point, I was taking 3 music classes and then only core electives. So I was taking a guitar class, a percussion class, and then choir, obviously, because I'm a vocalist.
I did not know that.
Yeah, well, my senior year was kind of not really high school, and if you want tea spilled, let me know, and I'll go on a rant about it. But that's not what this podcast is going to be about. So, and then I got into community college because my senior year wasn't super great, and I didn't have a great GPA, so I was for a long time I was debating whether or not I wanted to do music performance, which was the degree or the associate's degree title at the community college, or music education, or musical theater, because I had no prior experience to classical music, if you will. I opted to go through music performance for a couple reasons. One, if I decided I wanted to do musical theater, it would be easier to transition from a classical degree into a musical theater degree, because you still get, in my opinion, you still get a very well-rounded education vocally if you're doing classical music. It's harder to go from musical theater to classical. And the other reason was I didn't have to take an extra history class. And I was all about that. So I decided to do that. And then I ended up really liking classical music, so it kind of worked in my favor. And then I finished my degree by doing opera. Nowadays, I teach mostly younger students under the age high school and under are most of my students' age. Really, a lot of them being 6 to like 11.
Yeah.
So picking curriculum is very interesting, and you kind of have to be careful about what you do pick, but you also want to make sure that the students enjoy what they decide to choose and what you choose for them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like my musical education background.
Yeah. Mine is a little bit more of the stereotype pianist. So started taking piano lessons when I was 5. And from the time I was a 5-year-old all the way to graduating high school, I had 6 different piano instructors. I was switching through piano instructors, some piano instructors I grew out of.
Mm-hmm.
And then also in that time period, I was in band. So I played percussion and alto saxophone. So band is a big part of my like musical history too. And then I also went to a performing arts high school for my freshman year. And then after that, I went to a public high school where I went back to a band. But in that 1 year I was in a performing arts high school, I was a piano major and I was also in choir. So music has always been like there. So for me, choosing music was very much like a given. And I taught some people when I was younger, very briefly, and it really didn't turn into me teaching till I went into when I went to college, where then I suddenly became a tutor for like almost all 4 years. I think I started tutoring students my second semester of freshman year.
Whoa.
Yeah. So once I became a tutor, that's when I found my love for teaching. And I kind of looked and very much reflected back on my past instructors and private instructors for piano and my band instructors and stuff like that. And what I did like and what I didn't like. So I think I had that little grace preliminary period where I was like, it's okay if I mess up because I'm not really their teacher, I'm their tutor.
Yeah.
But, all of my quote like students, which were also my peers, I had like hour lessons with once or twice a week, and there was like 7 of them. Now exiting college, I teach piano, like Sarah. I only teach 2 kids, yeah, but twice a week, and it's weird because you end up seeing a lot of yourself in them, which is like really weird because they're younger and you're like, oh, is this how I was when I was a young pianist too? They're far better than I was at their age.
Wow.
Which is kind of scary because I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to keep up with you guys. But yeah, that's like my basic music background. Yeah, percussion, band, piano, a little bit of choir.
Yeah.
And then suddenly composition and a lot of music theory.
Yeah. Music theory sneaks up on you, I feel like.
It does.
You like know it, but you don't know it.
Yeah.
You like understand it, but there's like no name for it.
There's no name because you're like, oh yeah, I played this in like 7 pieces and I never knew what it... I didn't know it was called a half cadence, but I know the sound of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so with our with our backgrounds, I think we both realized how much like power your instructor has over you in like a weird way of what you learn and your general biases that you start to pick up from them. I know I'm trying to be super inclusive with my teachings. And I even had my student ask me, why don't we learn the repertoire that other classical pianists are learning? Yeah, and that was a conversation we had to have about, that's not the only music.
Yeah.
And he was very open to that. He's in high school. So he's super he's pretty knowledgeable, and like there's a lot of music out there.
Mhm.
But he was wondering, it's like, why didn't we learn Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, if you want to, like, I'm always down to do that. But, I have other pieces that I think might strike your interest more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say, and I'll answer this too, what would you say is the hardest, or what do you feel the most guilty about as like a teacher having your own biases with your students, which is kind of like a heavy loaded topic?
Yeah. A guilty experience. Sometimes I am not as strict when it comes to a classical approach. Because since I am also a composer and I love free form music and I don't mind accidents happening, I kind of sometimes say that to my student where we are playing let's say a Shostakovich piece, and he might be making mistakes throughout the thing, and I always tell him, like, no one's perfect, like, it's okay to make mistakes, but I also realize that sometimes I do have to crack down on the technical aspect because it is kind of that, technique base that you should be having right there. But then also he knows that he's human.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a little guilty part of me where I'm like, sometimes I think I should be stressing a little bit more on technique, but also that might be a residual part of my past. Yeah.
I think for me, there's like a couple, because I teach both voice and piano, so there's like different biases and different like things you end up feeling guilty on. For me, I have a tendency just in life in general to just like compare and contrast a lot. And it gets very dangerous when you start comparing students to other students and their growth. Because every child, especially right now, has so many other things that they're like having to go through. And so sometimes I'm like, I don't understand, like, why can't you get this, something like, I let me preface, I never ever say that in a lesson. I'm thinking it.
It's more the thought of it, and
it's
you feel
the
bad.
thought, and you feel really guilty about it the second you like think it. And then the other thing is, I feel slightly guilty for my voice students not pressuring them to learn the notes on a piece of music. And it's mostly I have an older student who we're not really focusing so much on like the notes on the staff, and we're focusing more on like emotional qualities that we can have in singing and stuff like that. But I don't really teach them this is C, middle C, you know, whatever. Some other students I do, but I also don't use solfege that much. I think it's a useful tool, but I don't think it's important.
Yeah. And I agree. There's some things that it's just like I found myself doing that from like teaching from the books, right?
Yeah.
And I would go through the books and I would pass like 5 pages because I'm like, I'm not going to teach you this right now. I don't think it's appropriate for your path currently, and we will look at it later in another piece. Which sometimes I regret.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm like, ooh, I really should have covered that. But it's kind of, you have to realize you're both on a journey together in a way, and you're there to guide them, and you're just hoping you're not guiding them in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. It's like you let that, you have a lesson, you let one small, like what you think would be such an insignificant thing slide, and then it ends up just like building and building into
Mhm.
this giant problem that you didn't think you like didn't even see coming.
Yeah, and then you have to address it for almost the whole entire lesson.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
And like it's gonna happen. I mean, it's happened to me as a student
Yeah.
where I accidentally made like, I would say it, because lessons, it's not a, some lessons can be like teacher versus student,
Mhm.
but I would say most lessons it's about getting through the journey together.
Yeah.
Like you said. So like learning to breathe the wrong way or unlearning like a bad technique.
Yeah.
It's hard.
And I think that's from people who, like, if they're looking at music lessons, right?
Mhm.
I think they see it as like school, right? There's the teacher who teaches the student things, right? But what I don't think people realize, it's a lot of self-learning for the student. And it's a lot of here are the tools, go practice.
Yeah.
Right? And then they come back and we address the problems that they have. And then we teach them a little bit more and then they go practice. Right? It's not like you only learn when you're at the lesson.
Yeah.
And I think that's something both teacher and student need to realize, because it's like I can't expect them to learn everything by themselves. But then I'm like, oh, I can't jam pack our lesson with like 100 facts and expect them to remember everything.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Another, just topic change, but looking back at your past instructors, right? And I'll answer this too, just like
Sure. Yeah.
Looking back at your past instructors, where did you see a shift in power dynamic? And where you didn't feel that it was necessarily right, and now as a teacher yourself, you would change something about that?
For the longest time, I had always been like a follower, especially when it came to instruction. Probably because through K through 12 education at a Catholic school, that's all you learn is like teacher's right, you were wrong, learn, basically, no matter what subject. And so when it came to like college education, not that I had blindly followed bad advice, because I don't think any of my instructors gave me bad advice. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying I just never questioned it. And I never pushed to do different repertoire as much as I think I could have.
Yeah.
Like if I were in college today and I decided to just start my music education bachelor's over again, I think I would have demanded composition lessons, because I never got that. And it's one of the things I wish I would have pushed for a little bit more. And I think I wish I would have I wish my experience would have been validated, because for the longest time I thought to be a classical singer, you go through the YAPs, which are young artist programs, you fill them out, you go to a million auditions, you apply for residency programs, and you just cross your fingers and hope to God after you spend somewhere around $10,000, which, yes, that number is correct.
You get into one.
You get into one. And I also realized that I just don't have the big opera voice. I mean, I have an opera voice, but I don't have like a big opera voice. It's lighter. It's more suited for either Baroque music or contemporary stuff.
Yeah.
Which, funny enough, that's mostly what I do. But I think that's the biggest thing. I wish I would have like trusted my instincts a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree. Mine would be somewhere around the realm of that. And it's where I started dipping my feet in a lot of things. It's kind of the opposite almost, actually. It's like I was given the chance to do composition lessons. And a lot of instructors told me I needed to pick a path, right? And I was like, no. I was like, okay, sure. And then I would pick both paths. But the thing is that both from composition and from piano, it's like expected 100%,
Yeah.
right? And I was like, I'm not a concert pianist, but I'm training to be a concert pianist. I'm a composer trying to just be a composer, right? Whatever that meant at that time. And it was, here's a bunch of repertoire, here's a very stylistic way of writing, and that's how I had to do it.
Yeah.
When finally, like 2 years down the line, I was like, let's not do this. And I think that was where there was a big shift, but it was definitely something I didn't challenge before, right? Because just like you never question your music instructor. Because you always think they're right? Which is something I always tell my students, don't assume I am right.
Wow, good for you.
Yeah, I tell the older one this, and I always tell them, don't assume I'm right, fact check me, because I also make mistakes, right? One was the difference between tenuto and Marcato. I was calling tenuto markings Marcato the whole, like, for 2 weeks, and now I have to go tell them and be like, hey, oopsies, sorry about this. Simple fix, but it's something where it's like, oh, you made a mistake. And I think that's where a lot of old instructors, like instructors where it's that same dynamic and that's their mindset, forget that they can also be at fault. Yeah, and something I'm trying to fix for myself. But yeah,
it's definitely like it's a harsh reality, I think, for a lot of older teachers, because it's just a product of their time, and you can hate on that and you can understand it. You know, I am right there with you. I have mixed opinions about that situation. Yes. But it's definitely a product of their time where if they make a mistake, it's almost if they have to keep rolling with the mistake. And admitting that they were wrong is sometimes harder than keeping up the lie. And I wouldn't say that has happened to me in all the time, or it was like a giant mistake or anything like that. I just know it has happened previously in my education. I will not state where, but and I think that's the difference between old teachers and new teachers, that like I am very much okay with my student being like, that's wrong. I'd be like, oh my gosh, you're right, that is wrong. I'm sorry I gave you the wrong advice. Thank you for correcting me. Let's move on, type of a thing. Because, and I tell this to and just like you said, like, we are human. We are not programmed at all. We are not a machine. We will make mistakes.
Yes.
And it happens all the time, you know, as I have, I think, upwards of 35 students. And you can really lose track of where people are, first off. I have lesson plans for everybody, and I, keep track of what everybody's working on. But it's very easy for things to slip through the cracks. Like last week, I did not prep a lesson as well as I could have, and I was making mistakes after mistakes after mistakes in my piano playing. And I had to apologize to the student. I was like, I'm so sorry. You were playing things correctly. I'm messing up all over the place. Keep going. I'm just going to keep listening to you. And if I see something or hear something, we'll stop and we'll talk about it, type of a situation. You just kind of have to hold yourself accountable and know that the guilt's there.
Yeah.
It's hard though, because I teach Zoom lessons and I know the parents on the other side of that screen. And it's like the fear of them being like, why aren't you a better teacher, blah, 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 blah.
because they think you can play everything perfectly.
Yeah. They think you can play everything perfectly, know everything.
You're like, trust me, I do not. Yeah. Speaking of, okay, so we've been really back and forth about private instruction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And academic instruction, right? But, you know, that's kind of one and the same when it's in college.
Yeah.
And that it's definitely a weird dynamic, right?
It is.
Do you see any similarities with like how, or complete differences on how people act as a private instructor and as an academic music instructor?
I definitely know that as a private music instructor, you are going to be more lax because it's not like a collective goal that you're reaching towards and everybody has to do their part. It's a individual, and you, like, if the individual decided not to practice that week, you can't be like, okay, we're going to sing this memorized, and if they fail, first off, they're going to feel like shit.
Yeah, there's no failure in private instruction.
Yeah,
right?
It's just working with what you've got at the time. And I have students who don't practice some weeks, and there are probably some private instructors out there who are like, what? You don't reprimand them for not practicing? I'm like,
no.
Bro, I'm busy too. Sometimes I don't practice. Like, are you kidding me? I'm not going to nail into like an 11-year-old who was like, my work week was so busy. Like, bro, that's okay. Let's play together. You got to work with what you got. And you just got to, I would say it's more go with the flow than academia. Although there have been some academia classes I've had where the instructor was lenient. And by lenient, I mean everybody was like, there's no way we can accomplish this deadline. And instead of them being like, well, it's on the syllabus, they were like, oh, do you guys want an extension for the next week? And the class would be like, yes, that's great. Thank you for doing that. We appreciate you accommodating to our busy lives. And also, I think reversing that, private instruction really leaves a lot up to, it's not that I don't let my students choose pieces, because I definitely do, especially as like the end of the year's wrapping up. I was like, is there anything that you wanted to learn how to play? Sometimes it's really difficult. And I'm like, that's going to be hard, but we will do it. But in academia, I think you have less opportunity for a student to be like, let's learn about this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really weird top. Like, if you think about it, it's like we tell people, and our instructors told us to play a certain thing, right?
Yeah.
And now, you know, we're trying to...
Were you ever given... Sorry to interrupt, but were you ever given the option to say no?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I was always given the option to say no. And I realized how hard it is to pick a piece for a student. It is really difficult, mainly when they start getting a little bit more advanced.
Yeah.
And coming, you know, when I was still taking piano lessons, I always was like, oh, I wish I was playing like different pieces, blah, blah, blah. But like in my mind, I was like, oh, it's because the piano instructor gives me pieces. Right? And I can say no to the piano piece. But I would just get given another piece and I might not be happy with it. Right? But then I realize now, I'm like, you're going off of the knowledge of your piano instructor and their pieces that they know. Because at some point, you know, it's gonna come to the realizations like the piano instructor also has to learn this piece.
Yeah.
Like, you have to like take that in consideration now. You're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna give my student this piece and I hope they like it. But at the same time, they don't realize I'm also learning this piece with them and also outside. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a weird, like, when you're younger, you don't think about it, right? And by younger, I mean like even 3 years ago.
Yeah.
you don't think about like the dynamic, right? Because you might see it as they are teacher, I am student, right? Which it is. But then when it's a private lesson, it should be a mentorship. It should be they are a mentor and they're guiding you. But also they should be a little bit more knowledgeable, right?
Mm-hmm.
I hope.
Yeah, I think it also depends on like the student, whether or not they're taking lessons casually or
True.
or like
Sometimes they don't say that. They don't know. They don't say if it's casual or not, or maybe they don't know.
I pick up on the vibe,
Mm.
at least for like singing for like my younger students. I know one student is like, I at the end of this year would like to be in the varsity choir or whatever,
Yeah.
and I was like, cool. So we have like things we're actually working on and all that kind of stuff. But like my younger like students is definitely casual. I
Mhm.
give them things that will help them with technique that they don't know helps them with technique. But we do like tongue twisters and we sing a bunch of songs that they want to sing.
Yeah.
I give them musical songs every once in a while to help them with technique, because musical songs are a little more wide range than the Disney pop songs that they want to sing.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's a complete, because we have completely different students.
We do, and we also
is completely
have
different, but
we also have completely different, I think, teaching styles too.
oh yeah, I reverted. I'm definitely like that. Even though I'd say I'm 100% against, like not 100% against it, but like I try not to be the stuffy classical piano instructor. Like I see myself and I am. Like, and I think when I tell you stuff, you're like,
that's pretty strict.
yeah, I end up being a little strict. And I guess it like shows in my, in myself type of thing, like how I do that. But
it's also probably like all you've ever known.
that's, yeah, I don't think
The
I've
other
ever,
thing.
I've never had a private instructor like you. Yeah, that's the thing.
I mean, I have my faults, but
Well, yeah, I've never had a piano private instructor that was like, let's play some Disney songs,
oh yeah.
I was always given classical music. And it was always classical and romantic music. And then throw in the Bach Baroque.
Yeah.
Right? It was only till recently, like, I was like, oh, let's just, like, dip our feet into the 1900s.
Did you sign, like, a Bartok piece?
I did have a Bartok piece when I was in high school, but it was, like, I think it was written in, like, 1901. Like, it was, like, right there.
Right there at the line. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, yeah. It's really weird how, because our private instructors also teach classes, right? Teach our academic classes.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I have a private instructor anymore, just because...
Our old private instructor.
Instructor, yeah. I would like to clarify, I haven't taken private lessons in a while.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
No shame.
And we like wrote papers for them and stuff like that. Did you notice how, say, their private instructor teaching also bled into their academic courses?
I mean, especially because, Kyle and I went to a very small college. Let's
very
preface.
liberal.
Very small liberal college.
Yeah.
And on top of that, if you, depending on your field, you would end up taking most of your classes from your private instructor. Like I did. I think I had 2 classes almost every single day with my private instructor.
Yeah.
Which was nice because you knew exactly what to
Honestly,
expect.
nice.
Their teaching style didn't change. And you also already had like a built up rapport for them. So first day of class wasn't like awkward introductions or anything like that. The I would say the pitfalls of having the same instructor would be that the curriculum was pretty consistently the same. And by curriculum, I mean like the things you would go over
Mm-hmm.
would be very consistent with like my private instruction. And again, I was a classical voice major, and a lot of my classes were diction classes or choral classes or opera scenes, things like that. So the composers that I would sing and the composers that I would study were also the same people that I would sing in private lessons and perform for like recitals and things like that. So the variation between what I would be exposed to was like very small.
Yeah.
Like the box was pretty little, which was nice when I took like theory or ear training or trying to think of other classes like rhythm, or I took like a Black Music Matters class. So that's when I really started to expand my horizons in terms of what other composers were out there, and like not just Puccini, Verdi, Fauré. I can't even think of other people right now. It's just
All
like,
the classics.
all the classics.
Yeah.
Like there are more than those people writing vocal music, and it doesn't have to be super complicated, which was nice. Although I do have to say, because they weren't my vocal classes, I did not pay attention as much. And that's because I felt this was like, it's a me thing. It was like my instructor thing, but like I felt like if I didn't get an A+ or above in my vocal classes, that I was a bad vocalist, because it meant like, oh, you don't understand your own field type of thing.
Yeah.
There's like a little bit of like guilt, and I think it was more like societal guilt injected into me than anything else. Did you have like a similar experience to that?
I did. Luckily,
You also were kind of like doing this, like,
Yeah.
get away.
again, I didn't choose a path.
Right.
But that also meant that all the information I was given was coming from like 7 different sources.
Yeah.
Right. So my box, like your box, mine was a lot bigger. But the thing is, I noticed it was a lot of the same thing.
Oof.
Right. And which is not to say I love all of my instructors. They were great and they taught me so much. But it's something even I notice as an instructor now. Like it's something hard where it's you like something.
Yeah.
You definitely like something and you want to show it and you want to share it with your students. But the thing is that what happens if your students aren't interested in that thing?
I've had a similar experience with this.
Yeah. And that's where the weird power dynamic comes from, right? It's like your instructors are sharing what they love, hoping you also love it.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's not the case. Right? That's not always the case. We hope it's always the case, because when I show my students a piece of music, I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
And then they go, oh, fun. Like, are we going to play the piece, like our piece now? And I'm like, oh.
Oh.
Oh. I was like, I thought this was cool, but okay. But so it was a lot of the same. Yeah. And in terms of like classes, like what you were saying, but from my perspective, yeah, but the only problem was that I definitely fell out of love for piano, and I didn't stay with it. So I really did not do well in my piano courses, because just like you said, it wasn't a private instruction, so I didn't super care about it, and I didn't give it a lot of time.
Yeah.
And that's, a me thing.
Yeah.
Just like, it's a you thing, me thing. But yeah.
So what was, I have an answer for mine, but what was your, did you show, hold on, I have like 8 thoughts going through my head right now. What was, so say you have practiced or learned this piece, and it goes with a lot of things, like you learn it, you perform it.
Yeah.
When you gave it to your student, were you doing everything that you possibly could not to give them a certain way to, like, teaching them how to play it like you played it?
Oh, yeah. That's hard. It's
hard.
really hard. And I tell my student this, and I say it right at the beginning, we have different hands. And this is from a pianist's perspective. We have very different hands. We are two different people. And a lot of that is like fingering, right? And it's artistic interpretation. So it's really hard when it's like a piece and it's always been interpreted this way, and I play it the way it's in, like, I was taught it. And so I'm teaching it to my student that way, and they don't play it that way. And I'm like, okay, well, historically, it wasn't played this way. But then obviously, I'm also for not playing it historically the way it is. So I'm like, I'll show you how it's done, like how it was always played. But if you don't want to play it that way, it's okay.
Yes.
Yeah. A moment would be like a certain retardando, right? Sometimes, retardandos you can play too slow, right? But, if the student wants to play it super slow, I just kind of let them. But then sometimes I go, okay, that's way too slow. You need to, like, bring it back to tempo just a tiny bit. So it's kind of like a choosing your own battle situation.
Yeah.
As a weird term that is to put with that, but it is definitely like I'm gonna, sometimes I do have to put my foot down and be like, this is how it has to be played. In terms of, sometimes physical health, because if they play it a certain way, I'm like, you're gonna get like carpal tunnel.
Yeah, I have to do that with my students too.
Yeah.
For me, one of my students, they were learning like two very stereotypical vocal pieces. I will name them because the interpretation for both of these pieces can widely vary for the most part. O mio Babino, which is a very classic Puccini piece. Most people in the opera world learn it. And then the other one is Caro mio ben, which like most singers want to put a nail through their skull every time they hear it.
Same with the accompanist.
It's like everybody's go-to song. It's because it's relatively easy.
Yeah.
And it's in a good key. But we had to talk through one, like my student had something physically stopping them, like health-wise, to be able to make it through certain phrases. So then they start taking breaths in different spots that I do. And I had to, instead of teaching them how I performed the piece, I usually, especially if it's a vocal piece, it's a little bit different when it's like an instrumental piece and it has no program to go with it. It's not program music. I tell them, put yourself in that place as a character. What do you think the character will do? Because then it is no longer my song. It is the student singing the character's song. And so, because like I would push through phrases or hold them longer, whatever, hold the fermatas. It all depends on like your capability, like you said, vocal health. You can't like hold the high note for as long as you physically can, because at a certain point you will hurt yourself.
I actually do something similar, because you said it's not program music. I make it program music.
Okay.
Yeah. After we're done learning like a section, or even when we haven't even learned the piece yet and we're just listening to it, I tell them to picture a scene in their head.
Oh, cool.
And I say, whenever you play this piece, I want you to picture that scene. And I always say, I'm like, if you want to know mine, like, I'll tell you, but you have to tell me yours first. And like, I don't want to influence your scene in your head, because this is not my piece. I always tell them that it's not my piece. And I was like, it's also not the composer's piece anymore. It is your piece, you're playing it.
Yeah. Smart. What would you say is your best go-to teacher advice for a new teacher?
For a new teacher?
Granted, both of us are kind of new teachers.
We are new teachers. Something where it's I wish someone told me.
Kind of, yeah.
Reflect on your past instructors.
Mm-hmm.
I like picking and choosing of what things they did and what they did and I like and I'm going to copy them, right? And then learn to utilize the tools to be flexible, right? Because realize every student is different in their learning capabilities and styles. So say all we do is learn from our past experiences, right? So if you see a student struggling with one thing, you remember, oh, I had the same thing like back when I was like 12.
Yeah.
Right? And be like, oh, okay, I know how to approach this now. And you try it out. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, backtrack. There's nothing wrong with backtracking on a lesson. Mainly when it's like something fundamental. Yeah. Strong bases.
I think my biggest advice, and this is because I mostly teach like really young kids, is just because they can understand the concept doesn't mean you shouldn't go slow. Because, and here's my thinking. Yes, depending on what book series you have for like piano teaching, because most of my young students are piano teachers. I do have vocal students and those are a little bit different. But do not learn more than, I would say, like 3 new concepts in a lesson. Max. Sometimes you learn 2 and that's totally okay. And that might be like a new note and a new piece. And sometimes, and it also, it does depend on the student for sure, but you need to be incredibly patient with them and allow them to get distracted and reel them back in after they have their like little moment. I like to do like stretching breaks. My students think it's so funny because I like make it really dumb. Another thing is allow yourself, so say you teach for like 30 minutes. A lot of my lessons are 30-minute lessons because they're like really small people.
They can sit still for 20 seconds.
Yes, they can sit still for, X amount of time. I let the last 5 minutes of my lesson, depending on what we've done, I let my student do whatever they want. Like they can, I'm like, do you want to do show and tell? Like, what's one thing you're looking forward to this weekend? Is there, I also let them like ask questions. And sometimes we don't play as much in certain lessons as other lessons. Like I'll give history lessons, especially when the student's like not gonna play that day.
Yeah.
At least you can still utilize that time. And then their parents aren't like, why didn't we do anything that lesson?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of like a lot of advice.
Yeah.
But go slow.
Go slow.
Go slow.
So go slow, learn from your past.
Yeah, go slow, learn from your past, and make it fun.
Always make it fun.
Always make it fun.
I always ask my student, are they still having fun?
Oh, I don't do that.
See,
I maybe should do that.
See, the reason why I do that is because no one asked me that.
Oh.
Yeah. And it was always like they assumed I was still having fun.
Yeah.
Right? So I always want to make sure my students are still having fun. So yeah. Wow. We are still very young instructors, by the way.
Yeah, like I have 6 months of like real hardcore experience.
Same. We started around the same time.
Yeah, it's a time. And I also want to like preface that our experience teaching, or my experience teaching, it's a little bit different for you, is all online. I had to jump over that curve for Zoom, and you really have to. You have to be patient with yourself and really allow some lessons to just be utter garbage. It's gonna happen. there's nothing you can do about it, especially if like the Wi-Fi connection for your students like crap. The whole lesson's like, can you hear me? You froze. You froze again. It's like, I know, thank you.
Oof.
We're waiting. Just be patient. It's hard.
Yeah. I think that was a pretty good talk.
Wrap it up?
Wrap it up.
All right.
And yeah, I would say main takeaway from this, you generally don't have, you could have a bad instructor, right? But there's always a lot of good in there too.
Yeah.
For the most part, there's exceptions, obviously.
There are exceptions.
But all my instructors, I don't think I've ever had a bad instructor. They've all done something great in my life. So yeah.
Our question for you guys is, what was if you're a teacher, what was the best advice you ever received from a former teacher in terms of like how to become a better teacher, or just like teacher advice? And non-teachers, what was your favorite experience with a teacher? It doesn't have to necessarily be music if you've never had like a musical background.
Mentorships are everywhere in every field.
Yeah, absolutely. It could be your kindergarten teacher, it could be your 7th grade science professor.
Yeah. But yeah. Well, thank you for listening. Answer those questions in the comments below. If you have any advice for us as music teachers. Thank you.
Like, comment, subscribe.
Yes, and we will see you next time.
Bye!